one more minute just to let people cycle in. Welcome everyone. Those of you who just joined, about 30 seconds and then we'll get started. Happy whatever day it is today.
Rumor has it, it's a Wednesday.
Wednesday? Yeah, okay.
Who knew?
Hi everyone, welcome. Just letting the numbers slow down and then we'll get started. Hi everyone, just a couple more seconds here, letting people filter in. Thank you, Eric, for clarifying that is the 8th week of April. All right, let's see if we can get to a round number and then I'll get started. All right. Okay, welcome everyone to Centro Conversations. I believe this is our 5th. Like I mentioned before, it is Wednesday, pretty sure. And we are excited to be joined by Jess, who some of you have already met and know and love. She is our DEI consultant here at Centro and helps with all the things on the back end as we continue with our intentional strategies and our conversations about diversity and inclusion here at our company. So for those of you who don't already know the people on the panel as well, just want to introduce to you Miss Nora Nasir, Miss Amber Keith, and Mr. James Doherty.
Wow. Doherty, yes, you got it.
Yeah, okay, all right. And James is on my team, and I really should have that down.
People struggle with my last name. I don't know why.
So just to set the stage for today a little bit, and as I emailed earlier today, this is an exercise that Jess is going to take the 4 of us, 4 Centrons, through. So please participate, have a pen and paper, and participate alongside us. We're kind of showing you how the activity works with just the 4 of us in discussion, but we encourage you to follow along and do it yourself as well. And we're going to spend the first half of it going through that activity with her, and the second half really just reflecting and talking through it as a group of 5 here on the panel for you to watch and, you know, participate with us as much as you can as Zoom calls go. So without further ado, I will give it to Jess and I will just become a participant in today's conversation. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I think what's important is that pandemic or not, doing any kind of self-reflective activity virtually or in person is always kind of a fascinating journey. So thank you for having me. As I have mentioned in my rename of my square, if you have any thoughts or comments along the way, you are welcome to text message, use the chat, you can chat with each other. You can send a Q&A. I'll be monitoring all of that. So Nora, Amber, James, and Ellis, you are off the clock. You do not have to do that. I think it's important to mention that doing any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion work during the pandemic or not, there's a very high level of self-reflection that is needed. And it is very hard to also take the time to do that work. But in order to move forward, you kind of need to know, in my opinion, where are you starting and how did you get to where we are starting? So today, to add some structure, what I want us to do is to do an activity where you're going to do identifying messages that you have learned about yourself through your life, identifying messages you've learned about others, identifying moments of your own behaviors and how they positively or possibly negatively impact others, connect those behaviors to your own self-learning. And then for the community groups, we're going to be doing this again and again and again and again and again, and people will actively participate in a conversation with one another that hopefully is authentic and allows for people to share and talk and connect. Today, are lucky winners. We will be engaging in that kind of processing conversation, and you webinar attendees will get to be kind of watching that like a television show. Because I also have been to a number of very bad diversity trainings, I would just like to say that number one, you do not have to share anything personal about your life with anybody. This is actually the hardest part of this activity, is that you're going to have to share with yourself about yourself in the life that you have already lived. That in itself is a challenge by choice. So if you don't want to think about your own life in that way, don't. No one will know. Because this is a virtual conversation, really seriously, no one will know. You are not going to have to lift your sheet of paper or scan it in or email or do anything. You're just having a conversation with yourself. That's scary enough. As I alluded, you will need pen and paper for this activity. Somebody somewhere says a slide that says you will need pen and paper for this activity, and somehow that's ambiguous. So they will use their iPad or some other kind of tablet. That is fine, tech freaks, but I am asking you to go old school and use pen and paper. Some of you are still don't want to because you don't want to get up. This is the chance. Please feel free to go get pen and paper old school. Others of you, nope, not doing it, which is fine. I understand. So then you're just gonna like think about it. You don't have to share it with anybody anyway. So I don't care if you use pen or paper or not, but I think you should, which is why I gave it a whole slide all to itself. Okay, we are going to be moving through 4 different prompts and then opening up today for a conversation that y'all will be observing between this complete random sample of amazing, incredible people. As we move through the prompts, I will be giving those prompts out, and I'm going to ask for y'all to go through and think and reflect on those prompts on your own paper. Now that hopefully some of you took me seriously, do y'all want to paper shame people? Feel free to hold up your paper because y'all are excellent role models. They all have pen and paper. They're going to be doing this. What I want you to do is to divide your sheet of paper into 4 quadrants. You don't need a ruler. You don't have to fold the sheet of paper. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just 4 quadrants. You can do this by making a plus sign or an X. And then I want you to number each quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. I will be giving you 4 different quadrant prompts. Somebody somewhere is going to want to steal this, so you're probably going to want to write the prompt in. I can give it to you later, but it's just for you to be able to follow through with the particular activity. So sheet of paper divided into 4 and numbered 1 through 4. You are nailing it. Great job. Okay, so as we are going through, I'm actually going to be giving you a prompt, and incredibly uncomfortably so, it's going to be quiet. I'm not going to play music. There will be a timer. I will be keeping track of the timer. Those extroverts like me, it's very hard to sit in silence for a moment, but it's only silent to everyone else. It will be a raucous conversation that you are having with yourself as you are putting things out on paper. When I was first kind of initiated to this process, the directions specifically stated to draw things, and I began to panic, probably as a former art major, about what kind of drawings I needed to do, what kind of style. Are we talking about abstract art or realist? Like, I went off. Okay, it's okay. When I say the word draw, I mean you are going to engage yourself in a conversation. And I want you to leave little bookmarks for yourself in the appropriate quadrant of your sheet of paper. That can be one word, it can be an image, it can be a sentence, whatever. But when you are engaging in a conversation about messages you've learned throughout your life up to this point, when I go back in the Wayback Machine, I might remember that time at the grocery store, or like, oh, that really nice woman that used to live across the street. Nobody else is engaging in this conversation, so you don't have to explain it to anyone. You're just going to draw or leave little breadcrumbs around messages that you have learned about the different prompts in the particular quadrants. This is not an art contest, I promise. Okay, for folks, that sometimes seems like an over explanation, but just wait. You will ask me more questions and I will just repeat this information. You're just engaging in a conversation with yourself. That's already scary enough. So first up, first quadrant with your pen and paper. What I want you to do is to spend some time, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes, but I just want you to record down messages you have learned about yourself, specifically in this particular topic, coping with the unknown. So we could be having this conversation pre-COVID-19, having it right now, possibly in the beginning, maybe in the middle. If we're lucky, maybe at the end. We're probably at the beginning. There's a whole different definition of coping with the unknown, but all of it matters. So from as far back as you can remember to this very second, what are messages that you have learned about yourself and how you cope with the unknown? So I'll give you about 5 minutes.
Good.
Sorry, Ellis, I muted you because I knew you were going to say something.
I'm just making sure you're sure no music, Jeopardy, countdown, no, nothing.
Oh,
Just
I will be talking along the way, of course. Yes, because you can't have complete and total silence because that would drive people nuts or they'll think that they lost the web. So
it's okay.
you
It's
are
the
still
message I'm
connected.
learning about myself. No silence.
That was the hardest part of the activity for me as well. Okay, so it's relatively quiet, at least on Zoom. You can generate your own noise in your side of the universe. It's roughly 5 minutes. I will let you know. Okay. Muting you, Ellis. You're more than halfway through. Congratulations. I would encourage you when thinking about messages you've learned about coping with the unknown, when are different times that you've been in situations of unknown? Are there commonalities? Are there differences? Did you learn from one to prepare you for the next one. The first one I thought of is whether or not I was going to get accepted to college in a family full of PhDs. It was very, 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 very nerve-wracking for me because I was afraid I was going to disappoint everybody. That was the feelings that I had. How did I cope with that unknown then? Is that similar? Is that different? That's the conversation I'm having with myself about messages I've learned about how I cope with the unknown. Under 30 seconds or so. Okay, as this quadrant comes to a close, you are welcome to go back and visit it. This is not an online test. You are welcome to go back if you think of other things as we move along in the process. Just take a moment and realize that for some of you, that is the longest it has been relatively quiet in your life. My husband was actually in a meeting that started with a meditation the other day. And while that was happening on Zoom, he was muted because the dogs were going crazy because the mail was coming and I was spilling dishes everywhere and it was very loud in the house. But in the Zoom world, they were all quiet meditating. So I want to be mindful that that might not have been focused time for some of you. And we're doing the best we can with what we got. So thank you very much for trusting me for Module 1. You are welcome to go back to it as needed. So we are going to move along to Module 2. Module 2 is I want you to record messages, draw pictures, leave breadcrumbs, bookmarks, whatever words you need to yourself about messages you have learned throughout your life about how other people cope with the unknown. So this is not about you, this is about all of them. How do other people cope with the unknown? Go ahead, you'll have a little bit of chunk of time for this one as well.
And Jess, I actually have a question about this. When you say it's about other people, is it about people who we know and interact with, or just about humans in general?
So good question. And you're not supposed to be asking questions.
Oh, sorry.
It's totally fine. You're breaking the rules by volunteering to be on the panel. It's totally great. So as you define, so other
Okay.
people are people that you have some kind of exposure to, you've heard about, you live with, you compare yourself to, or just other humans on the planet you have heard how they're supposed to behave. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay,
You get
great. Thank you.
You're welcome. You pick your own scale. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to like chat or text message me. I just like to give James a hard time. 1 minute left. Messages you've learned about others, coping with the unknown, whatever scale or definition of others you like. All right, as we wrap up that quadrant, we're getting ready to move to quadrant number 3. I mistyped it in the chat. How fascinating. I love making errors. So quadrant number 3 is coming up. So as we wrap up quadrant number 2, I just want you to take a minute and look at your sheet of paper or your thoughts if you're being rebellious and not doing it on paper. And I want you to notice that quadrant 1 is all about you. Quadrant 2 is all about everybody else, right? But what tends to happen is that we tend to reflect in comparing ourselves to others in a good or a negative way to really extreme other people. So there's our way, and then we think everybody else is doing all this other stuff. But there's a lot of people floating around in the middle. So for me, for example, when I think about coping with the unknown, I immediately think about all of those people on Instagram. This is literally why I hate Instagram, who seem to have a completely perfect life and are going to come out of this COVID-19 thing speaking 14 different languages and have visible abs, right? Like that is not the experience that I am having. And I would be writing very hard on those particular people. I see you, Karen. Anyway, I also know that I compare myself to people who are doing like far worse than me. So like, I can't be that bad, right? So like, for example, I've been sober for 16 years, even through COVID-19. What? At least today so far. So I used to compare myself to my grandfather. Thank you for the round of applause. I used to compare myself to my grandfather, who it was not out of the ordinary that he would ride his horse through the center of his teeny tiny town in Texas, completely naked, firing a gun in the air. I've never been that drunk. I probably am not an alcoholic. The truth is, I am an alcoholic. I just don't own a horse, right? Or a gun. And I am allergic to the sun, so being naked is probably a bad combo. So that is one scale. Karen on Instagram is another scale. So quadrant 2 tends to get filled up with those folks. So what I want you to do now in quadrant 3 is, what about like regular normal other people? What do I mean by regular other normal people, James? I mean anybody in between those extremes, right? So quadrant 3 is messages you've learned about even more other people than yourself. There are people who are struggling and floating around in the middle and nailing it and failing, sometimes by the minute. So what are messages you've learned, you've gleaned, you are gathering support from, etc., that are kind of in that middle range? That's what quadrant 3 is actually about, is messages you've learned about even more people other than yourself that aren't necessarily the extreme people that tend to take up most of the real estate in quadrant 2. So I'll give you some time. more than halfway through quadrant 3. You're doing a great job and getting the hang of this quiet thing. Good job. Okay, as we wrap up quadrant 3, just take a breath. According to my shrink, that's free, doesn't even take a copay. Just take a deep breath. Good job. So as this quadrant comes to a close, I want you just to notice that your life is full of messages that you have learned. And all of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that I do, one of my frequent refrains is that our lives are the best tools we have. And a lot of times we look at some kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion work as something extra or something additive that we need to do. And I am a full believer that the messages that you have learned in your life are the best tools you have. Now, some of them, let's be honest, we should probably edit or change or learn or do something better. We can do better. But it's still the habit that you have. It's still the messages that you have learned. If we are to reflect on how we deal or cope with the unknown and how other people in our immediate life or our attention span or people that we're aware of cope with the unknown, we need to connect those messages with our actual behaviors. And so what I want to invite us to do for quadrant 4, and I will explain and I will give examples, but for quadrant 4, I want us to reflect on messages that we have learned from ourselves during, let's say, this time. That could work because there's some unknown happening right now. But if you need to, you can expand it to other times where you were coping with the unknown. But times where you have colluded or participated in a silencing or marginalizing act in coping with the unknown. So what do I mean by this? So I was using this example earlier. So let's take Lisa. Let's pretend that Lisa is one of my team members. And one of the things that she is currently doing, either for her own mental health, her own emotional health, physical health, financial health, I don't know. All I know is that our shared calendar says that she has yoga again, like every day at 3:00. If I'm in a meeting and Lisa's going to need to be a part of that meeting and we're trying to decide when to have a meeting, if I say like, oh, no, remember we can't do it at 3:00 because Lisa has yoga, I'm being supportive of her. I'm being an ally. I'm advocating for her self-care. She has yoga, right? Like it's a standing thing. It's at 3:00. We get this. Great. Most of the time though, and maybe at some point in my own life, when I am really stressed out and I'm in the middle of coping with the unknown, I'm often oblivious. Sometimes I'm conscious, but sometimes, most of the time I'm unconscious of how I collude or participate in undermining coping with the unknown. So what I mean by this is that let's say Amber and I are in a meeting together and Noor, who of course is a wonderful ally is to Lisa and to others, says, oh, well, we can't have that meeting at 3:00 because Lisa has yoga at 3:00. And I say, Lisa has yoga at 3:00, right? Like I'm not being supportive of Lisa having yoga at 3 o'clock. If I don't want Lisa to come to the meeting and I'm like, great, let's schedule it for 3 o'clock because then we know Lisa can't come. We call that a Southern invitation. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. The idea of collusion and participating is consciously, actively not necessarily helping somebody, right? Because your participation is marginalizing or silencing, I'm not actually supporting Lisa doing yoga at 3 o'clock if I'm making fun of her in that way and I'm conscious of it. But there are also times where maybe Amber didn't say anything when I say Lisa has yoga at 3 o'clock, right? Amber's just kind of like, well, that was kind of a bad move, right? Not a good team member, Jess, right? But didn't necessarily do anything about it, then Amber would be colluding. So participating is actively doing something, and collusion is kind of like hanging out while the action is actually happening. So when we start talking often, I find, about different social identities related to social justice, etc., it might be a little bit easier to think of a time that we are colluding or participating in a time that is oppressive or silencing or marginalizing. But often those conversations are still hard. So because this one is about coping with the unknown, I want you to spend some time and have a conversation right now. I'm going to be very specific about the context. Right now, I would suggest in this COVID-19 response place, because you are currently at work, why not make it even a smaller space? And how you are colluding or participating in marginalizing or silencing your own coping with the unknown by not asking for help or not asking you something you specifically need, consciously or unconsciously, or colluding and participating to prevent someone else's coping with the unknown inside of Centro during COVID-19. That is where I would start. Now, if you want to go all advanced placement, get bigger than that, because maybe there's some patterns showing up in your life. But I'm going to give you some time to record in quadrant 4 messages you've learned from times where you colluded or participated in a silencing or marginalizing act when dealing or coping with the unknown. More than halfway through. You're doing great. As we wrap up quadrant 4, just a reminder that collusion or participating can be unconscious or conscious, and marginalizing or silencing is kind of putting someone else's or possibly your own needs to the side, to put it in the margins, or to silence your own needs or someone else's needs that you have either consciously or unconsciously colluded or participated in doing. Big words. Okay, let's do that breathing thing again. I believe it's still free. If you are using physical paper, first off, high five for following directions. Thank you very much for going through the 4 quadrants. What I want you to do now is to turn your paper over. The reason why is that, number one, you have just had a heated conversation with yourself. What is fascinating about a heated conversation is there are moments of a heated conversation that are silent, maybe even kind of stupefied because you don't know what to write, you don't know what to do, you don't know what the right answer is, you don't know how to spell something, maybe that's what, and then eventually you get to the place where like, she's going to use this, I can't write that down. So I just want you to take a moment, turn your paper over. There is stuff that you didn't write down because you didn't even want to engage in the conversation with yourself about that stuff. That is probably true for somebody. There is stuff that you are now remembering because you engaged in yourself with a conversation. There's hungry parts of you that really do crave ongoing self-reflection. For some of you, this is a regular activity. So you're like, yep, turn your paper over. What I want you to do now, still doing the breathing thing, I want you to turn your paper over. You already, if you did it once, that's good. You're on the blank side. If you're recycling paper, thank you for being an advocate for the planet, and use a different sheet of paper, which negates being an advocate for the planet. Breathe again. Feel free to send me text, use chats, Q&A, whatever you need to do. But on the blank side of a sheet of paper, I want you to draw another X or a plus, depending on what you want. Just divide it into 4 quadrants. You're going to take those 4 quadrants and you're going to label it easy, hard, next, and promise. Easy, hard, next, and promise. Whether we are talking about the process of this particular activity, or we are talking about the process of being self-reflective, or we are talking about the process of coping with the unknown, or we are talking about the process of like living our life. All of those are correct. If we are talking about the product of what the other side of your sheet of paper says, or possibly what this side of the sheet of paper is going to say, that is fine. If we are talking about the product of really beginning a self-reflective process of understanding of how you cope with the unknown, that then builds empathy and compassion and the ability to understand other people, may also be developing the tool of coping with the unknown. All of those are correct. So you get to pick your scale as to where you are comfortable. So what I want you to do is to spend a very brief amount of time jotting down some notes. Cue panel, you're coming up. Very quick notes about what was easy and what was hard. Again, you get to pick. Do I mean this particular activity? Do I mean not even past tense, but present tense? What is currently easy and what is currently hard about coping with this unknown? Flailing arms around is the new verb for COVID-19 response. Do I mean easy and hard about coping with the unknown. Some people, like, this is their like strength. Just jot down some notes about what's easy and hard. As you finish kind of making those notes to yourself about easy and hard, about the series of prompts, about right now, about your life, about the unknown in general, take another breath as needed. Then next up is literally next and promise. Oftentimes, even people who have a habit of being self-reflective, oftentimes taking that moment for yourself to engage in a conversation about the messages you have learned, there's some kind of outcome or call to action that kind of happens. For some, there's not, and that's also correct. But for some, you're like, wait, this is what I need to do next. Or, oh yeah, that was illuminating. I promise I'm going to do this because I know that this works for me. Or maybe you're being reflective on some of the conscious or unconscious behaviors that are impacting your team. What are you going to do next? And what kind of promises are you willing to hold yourself to about how you are coping with the unknown? So just make some notes about next and promise. When we do this over the next couple of weeks with all the different community groups, and then we'll have another standing open session, what we'll be doing at that time is, instead of a Zoom webinar, we'll be doing a Zoom meeting. And I'll actually be able to break all of the participants up into small breakout groups. I'll be facilitating by giving you some prompts around easy, hard, next, and promise, but you'll be able to engage in an authentic dialogue with whoever randomly gets put into your small breakout room about whatever you want to share or disclose. Again, no one can see your sheet of paper. Even if we did this activity in person, I wouldn't ask you to share your sheet of paper with anybody. But the process of being self-reflective and identifying what is easy, what is hard, what are you going to do next, and what do you want to promise or hold yourself accountable to, is part of that process. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to role model that easy, hard, next promise conversation. So I have promised our very high paid panelists, and by that I mean voluntold to be on the panel, you do not have to disclose anything that you do not want to disclose, whether you were in a work context or not. But I just want us to engage in a conversation about coping with the unknown, messages that you have learned that are helping you doing that, maybe messages that you have learned that are making it really hard for you to do that, what you're going to do next, and what you promise to yourself. For the webinar attendees, you get to watch a television show that is live and unscripted. Some people pay really good money for an unscripted show. But I want you, while we're having this conversation, to reflect, add to what you need to about your own easy, hard, next, and promise, and then breathe. Keep that up. If you can, right now, no pun intended, there are a lot of people who really are having a significant difficulty breathing, either through illness or just the amount of physiological stress of coping with the unknown. So if you can, do it, and frequently. So with that, I'm going to invite Noor, Amber, Ellis, and James to unmute yourself. And I'll just send us through kind of the general prompts. Anybody else watching, you're welcome to chat or use the Q&A or send me some text messages. But my opening question to our illustrious panel is, first off, breathing. That's usually something we can see, right? What I think is funny is almost 80% of the time that I say breathe, I'm not actually breathing. I hold my breath and do this with my hands, which feels like breathing to not my lungs. But whether we're talking in the context of hosting a webinar at work, or we're talking on whatever level you're comfortable, I just think let's just go around and do a check-in. How are you doing right now? So we'll start with James, and in the way that the squares show up. Ellis, you're next. James, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm really happy that I have a job that allows me to work from home and continue to do things like Centro conversations. So overall, I would say that I'm doing well.
Great. Ellis, if you're next, then Nora, you're up on deck.
I am checking in after that exercise with still anxiety for how much quiet there was. Like, I think that's the quietest that I have been, or that the 3 feet surrounding me has been since the quarantine began, with the house full of noise. So I would like to say that I very much appreciated it, but it actually like kind of stressed me out. So, and just like, yeah, so that's how I'm feeling, like a little anxious from that. And then, you know, because of how I work, wondering if I did the exercise right or not. And having learned a few things along the way that I think I need to commit to paying attention to off of activity. So that's how I'm feeling.
Excellent. And this is the surprise part of the activity where I ask you to scan in your sheet of paper. And send it to everybody. Just kidding.
Good picture.
Just kidding.
Mostly drew your face, Jess, so.
All right, Nora, you're up next, and Amber, you're on deck. How are you doing?
I think similar to Alice, but for different feelings, some feelings of like anxiety because of the quiet. Also because I'm always thinking about how the other person, the audience, is thinking about us sitting here doing this exercise, which they're also partaking in, but they're not actively participating. So are they as invested to do the same work? And does this feel more boring for them because they're not going to participate? Those are all the things I'm thinking about right now. So that's that. I am thankful to have a job. I am happy that we're continuing to have Centro conversations because I think people want to hear from the people that they work with outside of the context of just the active work they need to get done. So those are some of the things that are occurring to me in this moment.
Great. And for external processors like myself, those of you that actively have access to a keyboard, please feel free to blow up the chat room about whether or not you participated, how you felt about the silence, if you appreciated or liked the process. That would be really helpful, I think, because you're describing how almost every participant in person and virtually feels about silence, and that's without the global pandemic, right? So it's very hard to, it's a very structured activity and also involves a lot of silence, and I have no idea what people wrote down. So as a control freak facilitator, that was fun. So Amber, how are you doing?
Yeah, so I guess in relation to the activity, I share similar feelings of just anxiety, apprehension, just behind going into this blind, not knowing what we were going to be doing and how that was going to turn out. Wanted to make sure that I was prepared and doing everything right. So like acknowledging that, I think, and being more aware of like my own expectations of what I think I need to be doing and how that translates into like the uncertainty of right now in COVID or uncertainties in the future. I place a lot of expectation on myself of what I think I need to be doing. But I think the short answer is that there isn't a right answer or a right thing to be doing. So the first part of that is just acknowledging that awareness within myself. And then the next is echoing what James said. I'm just very grateful to have a job. My life can pretty much carry on as it was, you know, aside from being able to see my friends and family face to face. I have most of my luxuries the same, and that's all thanks to my job and the accessibilities of being able to work remote and have this. So just overall grateful. And I think a lot, like just looking at that holistically at my life, like there's a lot of things that I was holding as like a priority that I probably don't need to have as a priority in my life. And like coming out of this situation, coming into this situation has kind of made me more aware of that. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that thank you for sharing. And I think that the concept of easy and hard also is mutable. right? So sometimes what's been really easy, it becomes very, very hard, and it's the exact same thing, right? Like, I pretty much live in a house I love. I have fresh air. I get to watch sunsets over the water. I have 3 dogs that think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in the entire universe. And there are times where I feel trapped in my beautiful house on a cliff on the ocean. And if my dogs like bark one more time or cuddle, they're so needy. They need cuddles all the time. So the same easy can become really hard and then go back to easy, and is the best medicine, and is wonderful, and sucks, and is right? So just out of curiosity, if anybody, not calling on all 4 of you directly, just you get to volunteer, out of the 4 of you, is there an easy that becomes hard and a hard that becomes easy, or one that just has stayed easy, or one that has just stayed hard? Something that you are dealing with now that you'd want to share?
I'll go. I would say, and it's gonna sound more vague than I would like it to, but something that's easy that's become hard, but is also hard and becomes easy, is actually thinking about the unknown. Because the unknown, this concept of not knowing what's gonna happen next, has always been sort of the case of everyone's lives, but it's something that, because of COVID-19, we're all having to really take time to dive into and consider like long-term ramifications for what it can mean for not only our lives, but the lives of everyone we know. And yeah, that's something that I feel like before any of this had happened, thinking about the unknown, thinking about like, I don't know what could happen tomorrow or at the end of this week, was something that was easy. And now thinking of the unknown has become really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody else want to share one?
Yeah, I think on my end, something that I don't even acknowledge is hard. And not that it's necessarily become easier, but out of necessity, I'm doing it. Therefore, I guess if I've done something, it is easy because it's been achieved, is like just having the self-awareness to think about these things, because you busy yourself with all the other things you would be doing in your day-to-day life. You're just forced to have more time to reflect on things that you otherwise would never make space for. So even this exercise that we're actively having right now was birthed from the fact that COVID-19 is taking place. So I appreciate that it's happening, and it makes me want to explore more spaces that I'm just not making room and time and space for.
I would say mine's pretty similar to Jess's, but I'd substitute kids for dogs. So it's just working from home in general. Like, it's easier to, not have to commute and all of that. And then it's harder because there's a lot more distractions at home, and same with the kids. Like, sometimes it's easy and it's amazing that we get to spend so much time together, and sometimes I'm gonna like rip my hair out and the cuddling is too much, and then you're like, but my child's trying to cuddle with me. It's like, it's just too much. So it's like, easy hard. Definitely. I think I texted someone yesterday, like, glass case of emotions. So it's just a constant kind of like flip-flop in the new norm, but then it's like the new norm, so it doesn't even feel different at this point. So it's been a wild ride.
I actually told my therapist this morning, because I had an appointment, of course I did, that if I knew I was going to experience this many emotions, I would have expected it be like a thriller movie, right? Like an action-packed thriller, like what's going to happen next? But the reality is that I am experiencing a full span of emotions, and it really kind of feels like a PBS documentary.
Yeah, it's like a boring, crazy emotion.
Right. But like, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and also for the next and promise piece, I will say that my next promise share is that community means very different things, as do traditions, right? So Passover, Easter, Ramadan starts tomorrow, is very community and family based, and those things can't occur. I have a standing Friday call with my uncle that I'm almost completely estranged with, and my brother that I am almost completely estranged with. And we end every call with a promise for next Friday. My uncle has a lot of faith and lives by himself. My brother has 3 kids running underfoot and has a lot of faith. I don't have a lot of faith, but I don't have any kids. So the Venn diagram of how I'm experiencing family and community and what I am capable of doing, I'm hoping is something that I take post COVID-19 and understanding that. Any next promises on a small scale to a big scale that you're interested in sharing? And unfortunately, the few minutes that we have left.
I think for me, from my end, a lot of what I kind of like was eye-opening through the experience for me is where I'm like identifying what other people are doing during this unknown time and relating that back to me. And I think just being more like conscious of the fact that everybody reacts differently, and what that reaction is and how you're coping with that is going to be, you know, the best situation for that person, uniquely for that person. And like I got to go back to stop comparing myself to them. And then also like in the like extreme way where there are people that are doing really, really well in this situation, and then there are people that are obviously doing bad, and taking myself out of that and comparing myself to those two groups, just being more aware of that in the way that I've been approaching this, because like I had mentioned earlier, I put a lot of expectation on myself and I think others of what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, but just removing that and being more aware of that.
And the reality that I would potentially leave everyone with is that how you are doing is how you are doing, right? So nobody can do that wrongly because you are doing how you are doing. Everything that you reflected on, everything that you have learned past tense, everything that you will be learning presently and moving forward with is how we are collectively showing up in the world. And to my parting Centro conversation thought to the lovely panelists, as well as everyone else on the call and everyone watching the recording, is again, remember, we are all doing the best we can with what we've got some of the time, and that's on a normal day. But possibly redefining what we mean by normal day, what we mean by community, what we mean by doing, what we mean by preparation, what we mean by reflection, comparison, Amber, doing it right, Nor, right? Like the idea that you are doing what you are doing and you get to pick and choose if you want to do that again or you want to do that differently. That could be a great message we could all learn. So with that, thank you, panel. Please note that there will be a number of different sessions like this done within the community groups. I don't know, Ellis, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll send a follow-up email so you can either sign up to do the more conversation around this activity with community groups or with just a general session for any other Centron who wants to have, you know, a similar facilitated conversation on the activity and just dig a little deeper. So I'll send out a follow-up email after this.
Wonderful.
Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.